Star Trek The Original Series, Season 1, Episode 1, The Man-Trap. This is the first Star Trek episode that ever aired on TV. And they kind of famously aired the episodes out of their production order, which is why the second pilot episode, Where No Man Has Gone Before, was the third episode to air on TV. So The Man-Trap was the first time people were exposed to Star Trek. And it's an interesting way to do it because it's just a pretty standard sci-fi episode. There's nothing too deep or profound about it. It's just a Monster of the Week episode, which isn't really a bad thing. It keeps your interest, and it does a lot to establish the friendship between Kirk and McCoy, which you do not get in Where No Man Has Gone Before because McCoy isn't even in that episode. But I think we should just get started with this one. The episode opens up with the Enterprise in orbit above a planet called M113. Kirk, McCoy, and crewman Darnell beam down. And you can probably guess that Darnell is not going to make it back. And they're here to administer a routine medical examination of an archaeologist professor named Robert Crater and his wife Nancy. Why there is one archaeologist and his wife stationed on this outpost, I'll never know. But as a result, Starfleet has to send a passing starship this way every year just to check on them. And Nancy Crater also happens to be Dr. McCoy's old girlfriend, possibly even his wife, although that isn't really implied at all. And McCoy hasn't seen Nancy in 10 years, and he's a little nervous about it. Nancy arrives first to greet them, and McCoy sees her just as she appeared 10 years ago. Says she hasn't aged a day. But Kirk sees something different. She still appears to be the same woman to Kirk, but her hair is gray, and she seems to be in her mid-40s or so. And crewman Darnell sees an entirely different person, a young blonde woman, who he says reminds him of someone he met on a pleasure planet, which seems kind of inappropriate, so Kirk tells Darnell to wait outside. Not sure why Darnell is even here. I'm guessing Kirk just wanted to give a young crewman some experience in a low-risk situation. And even with that, Darnell kind of makes a fool out of himself. I mean, even if it's true, you probably shouldn't say that someone reminds you of a stripper you once knew. And we find out that Nancy's nickname for McCoy was Plum, which Kirk teases him about. I don't know why. It's not like Kirk doesn't have a cute nickname for him, too. And Nancy steps outside for a minute, and she sees Darnell, who once again sees her as an entirely different person. She walks away rather playfully, and Darnell follows. He really is that stupid. And Professor Crater shows up, and he's not too happy to see Kirk and McCoy. He really just wants to be left alone, and he says all they really need is some additional salt. McCoy starts talking about Nancy, and once again says that she hasn't aged since the last time he saw her. Says there isn't one gray hair on her head. And Kirk tries to counter that as nicely as possible. He says she's got some gray bones. And he tries to kind of make it less insulting by saying she's a handsome woman. I don't know why, but something about the word handsome seems kind of insulting when you're referring to a woman. Because it's like he can't bring himself to say she's pretty or beautiful, so he has to come up with something else. Although, to be fair, in reality, I don't think he would have said anything. I mean, why would you argue and say that a person isn't as attractive as you think? I get why they did it narratively, but it's actually a pretty rude thing for Kirk to say. And they hear Nancy scream. They run and find her standing near Darnell, who is now dead. And he has weird spots all over his face. So the first red shirt to die in Star Trek was actually a blue shirt. Interesting. And Nancy says Darnell ate a poisonous fruit. They decide to continue their medical examination later, and they are beaming up with Darnell to try to determine his cause of death. But before they go, Nancy says they need salt. So Both her and Professor Crater seem overly concerned with Salt. And it's interesting that McCoy seems to see Nancy as her real age now. And on the Enterprise, Spock is in command, and Uhura approaches him to have a chat, and she's kind of flirting with him.
Why don't you tell me I'm an attractive young lady, or ask me if I've ever been in love? Tell me how your planet Vulcan looks on a lazy evening when the moon is full.
Vulcan has no moon, Miss Uhura.
I'm not surprised, Mr. Spock.
Vulcan has no moon. Star Trek the Motion Picture begs to differ, Spock. Although I suppose it could be explained as a nearby planet, and the smaller body may be the moon of that planet. So Spock may be technically correct, but it's awfully close to Vulcan, don't you think? Either way, moving on. It's irrelevant. They get a call from the transporter room, and the transporter chief says there's been a death among the landing party. Why he doesn't specify who it is, I'll never know. And Uhura seems shocked that Spock doesn't show any emotion over this information.
I don't believe it.
Explain?
You explain. That means that somebody is dead and you just sit there. It could be Captain Kirk. He's the closest thing you have to a friend.
Lieutenant, my demonstration of concern will not change what has happened. The transporter room is very well manned, and they will call me if they need my assistance.
I don't know why she's surprised. He's a Vulcan. And I think if the captain was dead, the transporter chief would have said so. But this scene does a very good job of establishing exactly the kind of person that Spock is. This is the first time people saw a Vulcan, so it's good to showcase what exactly that is. But it is kind of interesting that Uhura was flirting with Spock. A full-blooded Vulcan probably would have said something about how it's inappropriate to fraternize with a superior officer on the bridge. And while Spock is as stoic as ever, he doesn't say that. It's almost like his human side might have enjoyed it more than he would ever admit. Anyway, moving on, finally. McCoy completes an examination of Darnell's body in sickbay, and he's befuddled. He says Darnell shouldn't be dead. There's nothing wrong with him, and he didn't eat any poisonous fruit. McCoy's thoughts seem to drift towards Nancy, and Kirk snaps him out of it by demanding that he find some answers. And sometime later, he does find some answers. He calls Kirk and Spock to sickbay and explains that Darnell has no sodium chloride in his body. It's been completely drained of salt. How McCoy didn't immediately figure this out, I have no idea. A simple tricorder probably could have told him that. And Kirk notes that both the professor and Nancy asked for salt, so this is getting a little suspicious. So Kirk and McCoy and a crewman named Green beam down to see if they can get some answers out of Nancy and her husband. They quickly find Professor Crater, but Kirk has to send crewman Green to find Nancy, which is obviously a mistake. I mean, he knows that Nancy was the only one present when Darnell died. I just think by now it's kind of a pointless risk to let one of his people be alone with either the professor or Nancy. In any case, Kirk tells Crater that Darnell died of salt depletion, and he mentions that they requested salt. Crater doesn't provide any answers, and he seems to avoid his questions. And Kirk says, "This is a mystery, and I don't like mysteries. They give me a bellyache, and I've got a beauty right now." Which I thought was a funny line. I guess he thinks his bellyache is more beautiful than Nancy. It's not a handsome bellyache, it's a beauty. And we can safely assume that Kirk would not enjoy playing around on the holodeck as Dixon Hill as much as Picard does. And when they aren't looking, Crater sneaks off. They chase after him and come across the dead body of some crewman that I didn't even know was here. It also jumps over to Nancy, who is standing over the dead body of crewman Green. So there are two more dead guys, both drained of salt. How much salt does this fucking thing need? It's getting a little absurd. And whatever this creature is begins to transform from Nancy into Crewman Green, and it poses as him and rejoins Kirk and McCoy. They all beam up together, and the Crewman Green imposter goes its own way and runs into Yeoman Janice Rand, who is carrying a plate of food, which looks to be some kind of bizarre space celery. I think this food was also shown again in Space Seed. Looks delicious. Anyway, the imposter follows Rand because she has some salt on the tray. She takes the food to Mr. Sulu in the botany lab. I don't know why she's serving Sulu food. Is that part of her duties? She's also served Kirk food from time to time. I don't know. Is that part of a yeoman's duty? It's not really clear. I mean, I can't imagine she's doing this sort of thing for every member of the senior staff, but who the hell knows? And Crewman Green, or the Crewman Green imposter, walks in and doesn't say a word. He just stares at Sulu's food. It's very weird. Thankfully, he gets scared off by a goofy plant that is clearly a hand puppet. And once he leaves, the imposter changes from Crewman Green to this guy, and he runs into Lieutenant Uhura and impresses her by speaking Swahili, her native language. He also says that he knows what she's thinking, which is interesting. This thing is also telepathic. And that's also apparent because it knew the real Nancy's pet name for McCoy, Peach, or Plum. Honestly, Peach would have made slightly more sense because he's from Georgia. But anyway, Uhura gets scared off because it seems like he's about to attack her. Why she tells no one about this, I'll never know. And McCoy is in his quarters trying to sleep. And he has some really interesting bookends above his head. I don't know what the fuck is going on here. What is this, Easter Island? I don't know. And Nancy shows up. McCoy is shocked to see her on the ship. And she kind of cozies up to McCoy. She also tells him that he should try to get some sleep. And he somehow agrees. He takes a sleeping pill and dozes off. And once he does, this Nancy creature takes the form of McCoy and leaves his quarters. Elsewhere, Sulu and Rand find another dead body. This guy. And he's not a blue shirt or a gold shirt or a red shirt. He is whatever kind of outfit this is. I have no idea. Either way, he's dead. Honestly, it looks like he just walked on the set from some other show and died right here. Meanwhile, Kirk and Spock beam down to talk to the professor. But when they find him, he starts shooting at them. They manage to sneak around and flank him, and it's actually pretty funny when they stun him.
Set. Acknowledged. Crater!
It's funny how it made like a bullet ricocheting sound when he got shot. They didn't quite figure out what the sound effects would be for phasers, I guess. He's also not knocked out. He's just kind of dazed, which is interesting. And when he finally tries to explain what's going on here, his voice sounds warped.
Your wife, Professor, where is she?
She was the last of her kind.
The last of her kind?
Last of its kind.
So apparently, being stunned by a phaser makes you sound like one of those anonymous witness interviews, like on Unsolved Mysteries or some shit. It's a little strange. But Crater's normal voice starts coming back, and he explains that this salt vampire is not Nancy, which is obvious at this point. And he goes on to say that it's the last of its kind. It was an indigenous species on this planet. And once there were millions, but they all died out. We don't know exactly how. I mean, maybe it was a lack of salt. But he compares it to the buffalo, which I don't think is a one-to-one comparison, since the buffalo is a benign animal, and this shape-shifting salt junkie is just going around treating people like pretzels. It also turns out that the creature killed the real Nancy and took her place, which, you know, makes me wonder what the fuck the professor has been doing with this ghoul down here alone on this planet this whole time. Has he been banging this thing? Is my question. I'm leaning towards yes. And Crater also says that the creature is intelligent. And by the time this is over, I think I'm going to disagree. But we'll get to that when we get to that. And they all beam up. Crater isn't providing any more answers, and he won't help them find the creature. Little do they know, they are sitting in the same room with it right now. So, Kirk orders McCoy, who is not really McCoy, to administer a truth serum on Crater. They head to sickbay along with Spock, and it's not long before we find out that Spock was attacked by the imposter McCoy. He tells Kirk what happened, and you can see Spock's green blood for the first time. Although the blood looks green, the cut itself looks red. It's almost like it was a last-minute addition to the character. And it turns out that the creature didn't kill Spock because his blood cells are different, and I guess that's unpalatable. So, that's good, I guess. We also find out that the creature has killed Professor Crater, which is nuts, because it lived on the planet with him for a long time and never attacked him. But now, it can't help itself. I don't get it. And the creature heads back to McCoy's quarters and transforms back into Nancy. It wakes McCoy up, and it's panicked, obviously. I mean, the game is pretty much up now. But it's hoping that it can trick McCoy into helping it. Kirk shows up, and he's armed. But I have no idea why he didn't bring any guards with him. He's alone, which is unfortunate, because he explains that it's not Nancy, but McCoy doesn't want to believe it. He wrestles the phaser away from Kirk, and then the creature moves towards the unarmed Kirk and attacks him. And he's paralyzed, so he's at this thing's mercy until McCoy helps him. And then Spock shows up, and he also tries to snap McCoy out of it. He does so by doing this.
It's killing the captain's suit, quick! I won't shoot Nancy. This is not Nancy. If she were Nancy, could she take this? Stop it! Stop it, Spock! Stop it! Is that Nancy, Doctor?
So the patented Captain Kirk double fist punch is employed by Spock, and it's kind of hilarious. It does nothing, and after it swats Spock away, it turns into its true form, and it's a pretty good monster for 60s TV. It starts to drain Kirk's salt, and McCoy finally comes to his senses and shoots it dead. Tragic. And on the bridge, they're about to leave orbit, and it's kind of a somber moment, as Kirk tells Spock and McCoy that he was just thinking about the buffalo, and the episode ends. Overall, decent episode. It's kind of middle of the road for me. It's not very deep, but it's actually a fairly decent introduction to the characters. The friendship between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy is shown pretty well, and you have some stuff with Uhura and Sulu, and also Rand. But I do have some questions about the creature, because it seems like it doesn't just need salt to survive. It seems like it's actually addicted to it, because it is just constantly looking to feed. I mean, how did this thing survive on this planet with this guy for so long with such a small supply of salt? It clearly needs more than that. And they say it's intelligent, but is it? An intelligent creature would be able to explain that it needs salt, right? It would be able to ask for it. But this thing never does. I mean, even a drug addict knows how to ask first before becoming violent. So I don't know. There are times when it seems intelligent, but there are times when it's either really stupid or really malicious. I mean, that's also another thing. It may not be stupid. It may just really enjoy killing. Or salt directly from the living tastes better to it. Who knows? And it's kind of interesting that it never threatens McCoy. It's almost like it's not so much that it's intelligent, it's just completely taking on the persona of the person it's imitating, even their emotions. And the real Nancy would never hurt McCoy, so the creature can't bring itself to do that either. It's a pretty cool alien creature, and I kind of wish we got to learn a little bit more about it. It shows up again on display in the episode The Squire of Gothos. It looks like it's been taxidermied, but that's all we ever see of it as far as I know. Maybe New Trek has done something with it. It wouldn't surprise me. But anyway, I should wrap this up. Let me know what you think of the man trap. And until next time, take it easy.
If she were Nancy, could she take this? Stop it! Stop it, Spock! If she were Nancy, could she take this? Stop it! Stop it, Spock! If she were Nancy, could she take this? Stop it! Stop it, Spock! Stop it!